we're so starved for talent. People who understand this digital revolution, transformation, and can also get their mind around digital mindfulness, they're very valuable. And what we're getting is these big software companies wish to attract those people to their city. One of the ways of doing that is to make their city smart. And if their city is smart, by inference, their community should be smart.
Hello and welcome to episode 103 of the Digital Mindfulness Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Ampofo. Joining me today is Ken Sinclair. As the founder of Automated Buildings, an online magazine dedicated to truly intelligent and integrated buildings, Ken has been working for the past 19 years to understand how buildings can be more intelligent, green, and connected. In this episode, Ken talks to us about his wide-ranging career and how, with the technology advances we're currently living through, the ways buildings can be more digitally mindful both for the environment and for the people within. But before we begin today, welcome to the Digital Mindfulness Podcast, where we bring you the best teachers and thought leaders from around the world to discuss how time well spent digitized experiences can help to improve human society and the world at large. If you're new to our show, then the best place to find out much more about us is at digitalmindfulness.net, where you'll find a collection of some required listening shows where we discuss everything from digital wellness to persuasive technologies, behavior design, and much, much more. So now enjoy the show with Ken Sinclair. Ken, thanks so much for joining me here on Digital Mindfulness. I'm really, really thrilled that we were able to come together and finally meet. And I'm really excited also to learn and have you share with the audience a bit more about automated buildings and not only the effect they have on people now, but also what, with the coming technology, just the effect they're projected to have on people. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I've been following your followings. I think we did an interview a while back, and I think I was definitely in the area of digital mindlessness rather than digital mindful. I've been looking a little closer and listening to a few of your podcasts, and I've got to admit I'm still trying to take it all in, but I think I hear you, and I'm starting to understand. And what excites me is how we can use some of your concepts to help humanize automated buildings.
Thank you. Well, thank you first of all for the really kind words. And I think that the last thing that you mentioned about using these concepts to humanize buildings is really, really critical. But for people that might not know, let's start at the beginning. So for people that might not know much about yourself or indeed what an automated building even is and why it's important to them, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit, Ken, about yourself and, again, what automated buildings are and how you became involved in this space.
Okay. Wow. In the beginning.
Yep.
In the beginning, the earth cooled. And anyway, starts there. I've been in the building automation industry for 5 decades, so have a bit of experience in that. Actually came out of tech school with the controls. Flair, I guess, worked for Johnson Controls, worked as an assistant energy analyst for the province of Alberta, got involved in some of the first DDC, direct digital control systems, for University of Alberta back in 1975. That was early days for this computerization. Basically moved to the west coast of Canada and grew up in the DDC industry. And we, towards the end of that, we renamed these energy management control systems to client comfort systems. That was sort of the first recognition of there may be people in these buildings. The industry is a very changed industry, and the original sense of it, it was controlled by major corporations who put their controls in the building with basically maintaining standards of temperature, humidity, and various things. There's never been really much room for human input until the last few years. So it's the building has been the building, and we haven't been very digitally mindfulness of the people within that building.
I think that's really fascinating, and I think also, well, I can't speak for everyone, of course, but certainly from my perspective, I don't think I've ever really been mindful of the building that I walk into. I've never been really aware of the effect that it not only that it has on me, but that it could potentially have on me. And I wonder if you could just speak to that. So, with, again, in the old days, with people just renting buildings out and people not really thinking about the effect that buildings have on people, how potentially could buildings impact people in a positive way?
Well, I think in the old days, buildings were built by developers, and they basically were trying to build the building at the lowest cost per square foot and cram the most amount of people into that building, and we'll put you in a cubicle and you will be happy if you want to come work for us. And that was sort of a mentality. I think the thing that radically changed that mentality was when software companies started buying buildings and became developers. And once they started moving in, they said our biggest asset is our people, not floor space or how much it costs. It doesn't matter how much it costs. If these people produce, it's all about them. And that was a big shift in thinking. And we still have the situation that there's developers who are trying to make a buck by providing space. But I think it's going to get more complicated for them as this movement starts to occur. There's another couple of pieces of that movement that the other thing in that movement is that the people coming into these buildings are younger, the new millennium generation, or younger generations then following, and they have a completely different thought as well. They've never been made to sit in a cubicle and work, and they're never going to. So get that out of your mind. That's one facet of it. Another facet is that the people work remotely now, and the whole building function has taken on a completely different use. The building now is more like a hotel that we go to, and we show up and we want to be entertained. And you said you've never had an experience with a building, but I kind of suspect that if you have gone to a very fancy hotel, or even a classic hotel, or a museum or a art gallery, you probably did at least notice that the building had some empathy for people. And I think the movement is away from tall glass, straight up buildings that are the most cost effective. And if they are in that pattern, we have to do something to them to make them a little more visually interesting. And so there's a big movement in thought.
One of the things that you spoke about there was the whole impact of software companies owning these spaces, and the emphasis being much more on people. And Ken, would you say then that also, in addition, the open space workspaces, would you say that that's a result of that thinking as well, of the software type thinking?
I think the biggest thing is that it has caused reason for change. It has caused us to focus on the value of the people. It also hits us on the head that we're not trying to serve one occupant at one workstation, because that workstation may be shared by as many as 7-8 people. So therefore, when they appear, they have to have personalization around them, and they have to feel that the building is reacting to them. And that might be the simplest thing, by acknowledging that they've come into the space and either basically doing digital talk to them, or basically sending them a text, or whatever method they have chose to be engaged.
Ken, so I was going to ask you about the role of technology in buildings, but I think perhaps perhaps a better question is, how do then these automated buildings, as you've just described, how do they become digitally mindful?
Well, I think one of the big things there is back in as I mentioned, I grew up in the direct digital revolution that started in the 1980s, and still some of that technology being used today. But growing up in that technology, we wrote an article way back when about the mythical "Make Me Happy" button, and we need this button by every workstation, and you just push it, and it makes you happy. Whatever it takes to make you happy. We kind of joked about that, and that was always our go-to joke is, they need a "Make Me Happy" button. And now with a cell phone on the hip of all the people in the buildings, and it basically staring into their cell phone typically makes them happy. They may be digitally mindless, but therefore it is what it is. But the thing is now we have a method of reaching out and involving them in the equation, which we never had before. Now, should they choose to engage, opt in, then we can work with them. If they choose not to, that's okay too, because we can also just detect their Wi-Fi presence, and at least we know they're in the room. And one thing we already know something about them is that they're private people, and they do not wish to digitally engage. So now we can start to try and understand what you're talking about.
So one of the things you've written about, Ken, recently is this whole idea of humanistic anticipatory buildings. And I wonder if you can just explain what that is exactly and why that's so important.
Well, I think a lot of it's coming out of the seminar you and I are both heading off to in a few weeks in Helsinki, the Nordic Smart Building event. And my main purpose for coming to that event was to meet people like yourself and to understand better the humanistic. So it's an interesting question you're asking me. I'm trying to understand what you were saying, and I thought that's what you said. Is that we have to take all of this digital crap and basically humanize it. So this is some of my feeble attempt of trying to feed back some of your ideas. So there you go.
So, Ken, in terms of the way that buildings have an effect on humans, I think the thing that I would automatically think of, because I'm not really aware of buildings shaping me from an emotional perspective, of course, aesthetically, but from a technological perspective, not really. So I guess the first thing I would think of would be, say, climate control, or the automatic lights that just come on, of course, sensing that people are in the room. But are these the things that you were thinking of when writing about this, or were you thinking of something more?
Yes. Let me tell you about a company in Vancouver, UBC.
Yeah.
They're called Sensible Building Science. I love their name. And what they've been doing is they've been doing a lot of work in developing anywhere you have a Wi-Fi router. They know exactly who is on that Wi-Fi router, and I'm sorry, they don't physically know who they are, but they know they've basically are holding an IP address on there. So basically, by counting the IP addresses, they now know the amount of phones in the room. And we started using this in your first example of lecture halls, and that worked extremely well. But once we started using the technology, and the university planners found out we had this technology, they said energy, smenergy, people satisfaction is okay. It's a university. We don't really care that much. They'll come anyway. But the thing that we wanted to know is how are the rooms being utilized? And so this heat map of where the people were on the campus became more valuable because of that was the purpose of the campus, was to basically provide housing for education. So where is the education occurring? And they were completely surprised that a book, a lecture theater booked for 200 people had 15 in it, and a small room was overfull, and people were actually in the hallway. So just being able to physically see that. So it's a digitalization. It's there's no opt-in, because you basically we know that information anyway. That's as soon as you have a cell phone, you have a virtual identity that we can hide who you are. And of course, this technology is used for traffic control by Google and Waze and all those folks. So a lot of this is just taking a look at what we are able to do with technology, which is an incredible amount of things, and basically using it. But the big shift, as you said, and I'm seeing exactly the same way as you, is in the last 6 months. It's been a radical change in thinking. And although you and I started talking about this before 6 months, there's now a whole bunch of people talking about it, and corporates are starting to think about it as well. So there's just a big shift in thought and how we can use this humanistically. And the other interesting thing that came in the conversation yesterday too was that we're starting to see less emphasis on IoT. 2 years ago, everything was IoT. 3 years ago, the cloud. We kept focusing on the technology. This is actually one of the first steps where we've started to see us all walk away from this IoT thing and these actual devices and start to focus on what are some of the humanistic relationships that we can create using empathy, using transcendental, we'll have to talk about that, and basically fuse all of these things together. And it's complex, and it's an area I think that all of us, myself included, as a technology person, we're not good at. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it just because we're not good at it. We just have to keep doing it till we get it right, like always.
I think it's I think that's a really important point, Ken, and I think particularly this whole idea of humanizing these digitized environments, as it were. This is something we were talking about. We've been talking about this for years now, and we just started to get into this again in the pre-interview. And one of the things you were speaking about is, again, this ambient tracking, if you like, of people's cell phones, and the building understanding where you are positionally and kind of what you might need just through using your cell phone. But do you see there being any pushback to people being tracked once they're in buildings, that it's, again, because it's not opt-in?
Well, I think there's a couple of thoughts there. I think that the whole digital thing, once you go down and you subscribe for a cell phone, you basically have linked your identity to that cell phone, and that relationship is there, and that relationship should be somewhat controllable by your carrier. But the fact that you have physical identity, a MAC address, which can be seen anytime your device comes, it's we basically, we can either look at you digitally as a no person, or we can have you identified as a person connected to that phone. And yes, I think there will be times that you'll opt in and opt out of that relationship. But the other side of this is, which we haven't talked about yet, is the video analytics is getting so sophisticated that we now have video and train stations and stuff like that, and we're looking for terrorists, and we can zoom in, and there's basically AI algorithms written to pluck out various pieces of information. So actually, one of the things that I don't know if I've got this into my writings yet, but I've been reading about it, is we're via video, we can actually sense at least four states of emotion. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm neutral, I'm infuriated. Just being able to do that allows us to build empathy into a video algorithm that would start moving it. So we can actually do that, and if we can effectively erase all of that information so we don't know who that person is, but we can basically try to gauge the emotion of a crowd. And some of that stuff is starting to get pretty interesting, but it's early days for all of this, but it's you can kind of see the direction that this is going to go. I think that I always get a kick out of people who are very particular about their information, and I ask them about 3 questions, and they basically have given away all their information already, that the game's over. So, why are you talking about it? So
So one of the things, Ken, you spoke about earlier very briefly was this whole idea of, and again, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but transcendental coalescence. And I've read the articles on this, and I think it's a really great idea. It's a really interesting idea of, again, making buildings ever more empathic and more digitally mindful. But I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about, again, what that is and how it can be applied.
Yeah, I got to admit that article caught me a bit blindsided as well. And everyone would guess from the title it came out of India. So some deep Gandhi thinking, I'm sure. But I think the message is clear. That was actually done by Johnson Control, one of the major control companies, their India branch, and they've written for us before, and they are extending the smart building, automated building, into the smart city. And that's probably another little bit we should talk about, is that transition. And the lines between building and city, basically building, community, and city, are blurring. And part of what is causing that blurring, in my mind, is the digitalization, back again to the cell phone, back to the fact that we work remotely. As we work remotely, we typically are working more from the community than the building, and we look for digital support within our cities, whether that be free Wi-Fi everywhere we go, or high speed points we can go to, coffee, how well all the coffee shops are connected. All of these things start to be an integral piece of which city some of these people want to move to. So this is an interesting thing too, is we're so starved for talent. People who understand this digital revolution, transformation, and can also get their mind around digital mindfulness, they're very valuable. And what we're getting is these big software companies wish to attract those people to their city. One of the ways of doing that is to make their city smart. And if their city is smart, by by inference, their community should be smart, and their buildings should also be smart. So we're under a pressure to do a better virtual digital integration of our automated buildings to the smart cities.
I love it though, but it makes complete sense. I mean, we were talking briefly in the pre-interview about WeWork, but the whole idea, of the gig economy, and as you mentioned, people working remotely, having those facilities there, being able, the city, basically cities being smart and buildings having these facilities, they're incredibly important. And one of the other things that we spoke about just before, and I wonder if you would touch on this now, going on from cities, are the cultural differences now. So you were mentioning how in North America, in relation to Europe in particular, like there are very clear differences of thought in the ways that we're starting to think now, about the application of digital mindfulness, but also in terms of how we're thinking about building out smart cities, smart buildings, etc. I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big thing is there's an attitude change. The basically digital transformation has become one of the biggest industries, and so therefore by default it looks for the greatest number of square feet of building, and also it extends that square feet of building out to our homes and to local work centers, so it even redefines what that space might look like. And more, the buildings are turning into like a hotel atmosphere where people come to have physical face-to-face and basically do what we would term traditional interactions that used to occur every day at the coffee klitsch on the floor now occur in at lesser circumstances, but basically maybe once a month or something, everybody gets together. So we have people coming to the buildings at work, or if they're particularly working on a particular project, they may come to the building for a week or two or a month or something like that. So we have a much more transient folks in these buildings. That's sort of one thing. The other thing, because of those people, I think a bit of what's driving this is that once we start working from home, there's a cross-pollination that when we do come into the office, there's aspects of our home that we like. And one of the aspects of our home is that we can control everything. We can control the temperature, we can control the window shading, we can control the color of the light, we can do anything we wish to do that we put at home. And when we bring that into the office, we want that same kind of touch and feel. And so that's quite a different than the way our office buildings have been configured. But and at this point too, I'd also like to just talk a little bit about the change in thinking of large corporations. And again, the large corporations are tending to become these large software companies. And as they start to, I think they're leading us in how we're going to achieve humanistic buildings. And a friend of ours, Lindsay Baker, who was with Comfy, which was a company that pioneered people-powered buildings and basically created an app so that the people could communicate with their temperature and comfort issues, and hence the name Comfy. And she has now left Comfy and is now started with WeWork. And I love her title because her title is the Head of Sustainability and Well-Being at WeWork. So right away, a position like that suggests that we're now more interested in client care, client comfort, which brings us back to how we renamed our systems in the early 80s. It's actually the late 70s. And her description of what it is she would like to achieve in life is catalyzing at the cutting edge of healthy and sustainable buildings and communities, from research to nonprofit work, from startup to corporates. I work wherever I can have a large-scale impact, carrying a speech torch for human-centered building operations and design. I think what we're starting to see is the young people are passionate about change, and they're passionate about changing our physical buildings. And one of my other articles, I quoted Ken Dooley out of Helsinki, and he looking forward to meeting him. And he basically published his company description, which was what's similar, and that's basically their goal. So there are people who are dedicated to making this happen, to take the jam of the traditional jam is in the building and put some mindfulness jelly on it.
So Ken, I'm interested to know we've been talking now about, these human-centered buildings and empathic automated buildings, but what would you say then, in being in these environments, what would you say are the most important human qualities in this hyper-connected age, and how do we design for those?
I think probably the most important one from my point of view is just connected. In the past, we've not connected the users to our building. In fact, if you look at a graphical user interface for a building, it is basically aimed at the building operator, the building engineer, the owner, probably crunching out some energy numbers, and maybe a little bit of the design but there's been very little effort to share any of that information with the occupants. And I think that's the cry that is coming, is that this needs to be done. In the past, we had no idea how we would do that, but now we have many ideas how we could do that, and we're all kind of working with those. So I think probably the greatest one thing would be just connecting the person with the building and making them feel like they belong, and that they have an interaction with the building. I think that's probably important too, just as they do in their home. Whether it simply is opening the door, closing the window, they have an interaction with their environment. We basically have taken that interaction away from them in large automated buildings.
And again, you did mention it previously, but that whole idea that we can control everything at home, and that's the kind of experience, at least in part, that we're looking for in these automated buildings. And I think that's really interesting, because I don't think that a lot of employees get that at the moment. But you're saying that this is something that young people in particular are going to demand from their new workspaces.
Well, the problem with having somebody working remotely, when you invite them into your space, they will often say, no, I'll just stay here, thank you. If your space is awkward and it starts to get into how difficult the transport is. I mean, if I'm looking at an hour or 2 hour commute to get to this building, already I don't like this building, and I'm not even in it yet. So we have to basically maybe we don't want to bring them to that building. Maybe we want to bring a team to a building that is only 15 minutes away from them and that they can walk to. they would be much more pleased to do that and to bike. I think there's a whole mentality too. There's this everybody I meet from the younger generation wants to save the world, and that's good. I'm on their side too. I want to save the world, and I want to help them. And they just point out some glowing errors in our thinking. Building large buildings and creating congestion, and we need to work around that. They like the excitement of a city, but they like the excitement of a city without cars.
That's absolutely fascinating, Ken. Ken, unfortunately, we've come to the end, but where can people find out more about you and your work and connect with you?
Automatedbuildings.com. It's a gigantic word. ab.com was gone when I selected it, so it had to be that long. But it's just automatedbuildings with an s.com. So that gets us to our home page. I also blog as on Twitter as at Ken_Sinclair, and I also have about 13,000 followers on LinkedIn. Although I've got to mention that the bulk of my followers and folks are technology people, and we're just learning about what digital mindfulness might mean.
Fantastic. Well, Ken, but thanks so much, Ken, for spending time with us today and telling us much more about this fascinating topic.